reasons we're on this wonderful farm with this wonderful family is because they are world leaders in this whole approach and this whole potential of this approach. It's been popularised by a bloke from Zimbabwe originally called Alan Savory, but of course Alan learned from the same bloke. Who was that guy's name? What? John Adcox. I see, okay, Acox. So John Acox was actually the guy who taught both Dick and Alan. And basically the concept here is real simple. Here's the deal. The definition of the word science is adherence to natural laws and principles. Look up Webster's dictionary, that's what it is. And a great deal of what we did in the name of medical science, veterinary science, and agricultural science has been anything but that. I mean, I guess the most graphic example of the failure of a symptom treating approach, the bankruptcy of that approach, is the modern medical machine. Because the number one killer, as we stand here, is heart disease, with cancer breathing down its neck. The third largest killer until last month was stroke. The new third largest killer is prescription medicine. I mean, do you understand how bankrupt that is, that your medicine's become your third largest killer? And if we look at veterinary science, we look at dogs. They've got a genetic potential of 23. In 1900, they lived to 18. Last year, the average age of dogs in Australia was 8. I mean, how can you walk around as a veterinary scientist and say, I took them down from 18 to 8, that's pretty good. It's not pretty good. It's a miserable failure, and it's an example of the bankruptcy of not getting back to root cause. It's saying, okay, we give them a vaccination, we give them a flea dip, which is a real toxic substance, and what do we expect but to knock out their immune systems and create this much shorter living animal. So if we do that in relation to agriculture, say, okay, we're going to learn from nature, because nature's a perfect blueprint, and that's what we're supposed to do, not say, well, we're going to do better than that. You know, what kind of arrogance is that scenario? And so if we do that, we say, okay, what are the most productive areas in the history of mankind? And they've been productive in that manner for hundreds upon hundreds of years. Well, the most productive soils ever were the Great Plains in the US, followed quite closely by the Nile Valley. Now, how did they produce more biomass every year, without exception, for decades, for hundreds of years, thousands of years, than we've never been able to equal the amount that they produce. With all the truckloads of urea you want to throw on it, how do they do that? Well, when you analyse that situation, that's where we can start learning from nature. Huge herds of bison buffalo with a predator effect come into an area for a short time, huge amounts of dung and urine. Their hooves create a bit of a seed bed. There's a bunch of biodiversity in the seeds in their poo, and they moved out, always, at 4 inches. Like nature knew, you've got to leave something in there. And what's that about? And how can we learn from that concept? Very simple. That's the solar panel. The whole system is fired by that solar panel that captures the sunlight, the CO2 and the water, and produces the basic building block that drives the system. And part of that glucose that's produced becomes humus in the soil. And if you graze down to here, the roots who have been supported by the top half, the roots prune themselves in accord with where you graze. So you're down to a tabletop, which is about 80% of the grazing country on the planet, and much more opportunity, incidentally, to change and build humus on undisturbed grazing land than what there is in vegetable fields, for example. But you graze down to here, your roots are down here. Dig down and have a look when you've grazed to a tabletop how long your roots have become, because they can't stay long because they're supported by the top half of the plant. So your whole production apparatus of humus and a bunch of other things, including the sugars that feed the bugs, that fix the nitrogen and solubilise the phosphate and support their host, the plant, that system's fallen on its arse because you didn't understand nature. Leave 4 inches, copy nature. And of course, this was the whole concept of intelligent grazing, which is what I call this form of grazing, where we bring large animals. And here's a story. There's a woman called Simone Laurie in central Queensland. I got hit a bit by that storm, but Simone, they've got a couple of thousand acres, her and her husband, and she said to her husband, look, I want to bet you, this is interesting because women, and I said it's nice to see a few women here today, are stepping up to the plate everywhere, and it may well be the point that we had a shot, men had a shot, and we didn't do too good, and we need a little bit more nurturing energy in the scene, so it's fairly good that we've got women stepping up to the plate globally, everywhere, thankfully. But we look at Simone's situation. She said, here's the story. I'm prepared to bet you for my own money $10,000 that I can make more money from 200 acres within 3 years than you can make from the remaining 1,800 acres. And her husband said, bring it on, girl. And so the bet began. Simone separated her 200 acres into 20 paddocks, 20 10-acre paddocks. She planted Leucaena, which is a super fast-growing leguminous shrub that can be grazed to the ground and back again in 20 days. And she moved 632 head of cattle from each paddock. 632, so this is the buffalo model, from one paddock to the next, 20-day cycle and back in the first paddock again, never grazing below 4 inches. However you do this thing, just remember the 4-inch model, because that's what nature did, and it did it for a reason. So they grazed the Leucaena right down to this high, and it's back to this high again 3 weeks later. It took her 2 years to win the $10,000. Now, I was on Simone Laurie's farm just recently, and I saw her first soil test from 3 years. Now it's 3 years later. I saw her first soil test, and I saw her most recent soil test, and I looked at these tests and I said, Simone, come on, girl, you've got to admit you cheated here. You spent $1,000 an acre here. There's no way you haven't. You've changed your Cal-Mag ratio, massive increase and improvement in that ratio. All the trace minerals, you've doubled your organic matter, you've put in some compost, you put in some lime, you put in some trace minerals, and you can't say you haven't. She said, I didn't do one thing. This was using my cattle as my principal fertility tool. And that's what this thing's about.